Welcome everyone to the January 2016 IRCP webinar. We do have our session planned for this year. It'll be June 3rd and 4th in Saskatoon. We haven't posted the call for presentations yet, and registration is not available yet, but we know those dates are solid. So if you can make it to Saskatoon, we'd love to see you, and if you could put June 3rd and 4th in your calendar, that would be great. We'll be tagging on to the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada conference at the same hotel in Saskatoon, and they are meeting on June 1st and 2nd. So we'd love to have you for both meetings if possible. And today we have Duncan McConnell as our guest speaker. He's Program Director in Paramedicine at Griffith University in the School of Medicine in Australia. He has 20 years operational experience as a paramedic, during which time he was awarded the 2010-2011 Queensland Floods and Cyclone Group Citation, the Australian Defence Medal, and the Assistant Commissioner's Commendation for Bravery in 2004. He has experience in both metropolitan and rural and remote locations. In 2013, he accepted a position with Griffith University as the Foundational Program Director in the School of Medicine to develop their new Paramedicine Program. His research includes the use of simulation within pre-hospital care education delivery, with specific focus in the use of virtual, immersive, or augmented reality to engage with and enrich learning of students. And Duncan was one of our speakers when we did IRCP in October in Melbourne. And he's got some follow-up information to give us today. And so, Duncan, we'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Gary. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for asking me to come and present a little bit further on what we discussed here in Australia back in October 2015. For those of you that weren't at that particular conference, for the first few minutes I'm just going to go over just some of the background of what was covered in that, and then what I sort of plan to do is really sort of identify some of the techniques that we're doing here at Griffith University on the Gold Coast, and just sort of explain to you how we're planning on implementing that across our paramedic program. Now at this stage we're doing a bachelor sort of undergrad approach, and as we progressively roll out our new degree, our higher level masters and higher degree research programs will be launched as well. So as Gary mentioned, I've been with ambulance for about 20 years now, primarily Queensland. But I have dabbled a bit in the commercial operations and in military as well. For me, the bulk of my work was with Queensland Ambulance, and as Gary did mention, I worked both metropolitan and rural and remote. I must admit I enjoyed my rural and remote working environments a little bit more than metropolitan. But the opportunity to come back and develop this university program with the School of Medicine at Griffith was a little bit too hard to resist. So without further ado, I'll get going, and hopefully I'll be able to run this program that Gary and I are fiddling with this morning. So where I'm going to begin is that this will just start off with the basic overview of what was covered back in October. But so for me, the primary focus today will just be on how we ended up in the virtual reality and augmented reality direction. But before we can sort of get there, we need to talk about some other aspects of it, as in sort of where has simulation come over the years. Now, I did hope this slide would actually sort of appear in three different areas, but it hasn't. So I'll just explain the transitions as they're up as one image. So simulation-based training, it's been around for many years in industries like aviation, nuclear power and health, but only recently have we started to see the pre-hospital care environment really take advantage of these developments. Now if we take a look at aviation and nuclear power as examples, if you look at how they identify safety, and how they've made leaps and bounds and changes in safety, a lot of that has been a result of fairly significant incidents that have occurred, and then they've taken advantage of simulation technology to try and improve these incidents from never happening again. So, I mean, simple examples, nuclear power with Chernobyl back in April 26, 1986, when reactor number 4 went down. And since then, there's been numerous different methodologies that have been put in place to ensure that something like that never happens again. And then if we go across to the aviation sector, you can look at things such as aviation incidents that occurred in the late 80s, late 70s and early 80s, to do with crew resource management. With back in the days where the captain was almighty and no other crew member in the cockpit would speak up, and there were many accidents that actually occurred where aircraft were flown into the ground when other people on board knew what was going on but wouldn't speak up against the captain. And we're now seeing that in medicine as well, where they've adopted some of those crew resource management approaches within medicine so that everyone sees the bigger picture. And for those of you that have had quite a few years in paramedicine, you'll notice too that the focus on that whole team and that sort of crew resource management technique, particularly in your sort of higher end critical care, intensive care paramedic options, or those working in aeromedical areas or things of that nature, close encounters with doctors or other medical staff from hospital, you have that set crew resource management method that you all work towards, so that everyone's singing off the same song sheet. And if someone thinks there's something slightly ajar, they sort of speak up and try and make sure that everyone stays on the right path. And then you go across to where we sort of first started to step into sort of the medical kind of simulation direction, and probably really one of the first most memorable ones that everyone would sort of come across would be Resuscitation back in 1960. And then you look at the type of high-fidelity mannequins that we have available to us now. And I'm sure back in 1960, no one could possibly imagine that we could have mannequins as complex and as advanced as what we do today. Now, primarily I'll be focusing on the virtual reality and augmented reality-based simulation today, but these particular mannequins that we have available to us, the low-fidelity and high-fidelity mannequins, can be incorporated in some of this immersive kind of virtual reality simulation that we're trialling here at Griffith University. So primarily for me, what helps in the driving of why do we use simulation? Well, in no way am I saying that simulation is going to replace actual patient contact or actual experiences gained out on the field. However, just like aviation and just like nuclear power simulation training, it does provide people with experiences that they can practice in a classroom in a safe environment, and if they make a mistake, well, we can put the pause button on, step back, review what we've been doing, identify the mistakes that have been made, and then try and run that scenario again or simulation again to enable us to actually improve on mistakes that were made previously, and ultimately improving patient safety. And that's what it's all about, improving patient safety and providing gold standard of patient care to our patients. And that's what we're trying to do. So I do want to reiterate that in no way am I trying to say that simulation is going to replace actual practice. However, it does provide us a very good outlet to not only maintain skills, but practice new techniques and skills as well. And for those that are on our line today that happen to be working in rural and remote areas, there'll be a few things I'll talk about later that may be of interest to you, but it also provides access to things that you may not get exposure to because your workload may be a little bit low, or maybe you're dealing with volunteers or those that have sort of the first responder kind of outfits over in the States and Canada. Maybe it gives you an opportunity to show them something that previously they may not have encountered. And particularly the virtual immersion that we'll touch on a little bit later, you'll be surprised at how simple and cost-effective that actually can be on quite a tight budget without sort of spending thousands and thousands of dollars. So continuing on with patient safety, there's one particular article I'm just going to refer back to. It was by Breadmast et al. In 2010, and it was conducted by London HEMS, so the Helicopter Emergency Medical Service over there in London, and they conducted it over 24 months. Now, for those of you on the line that run an aeromedical service or have got access to aeromedical service, you know the running of that is a highly, highly expensive organisation to run. However, what this particular study did was it took away the helicopter aspect of it, and it put back into the medical aspect of the treating of the patients and the improvement in crew resource management and the improvement in their motor skills, critical decision making, scene management, sort of the team interactions. And how they actually achieved this was that they took a very simplistic mannequin. This could be one that had broken down, so that was no longer able to be functional as a high-fidelity mannequin, but they could still attach an airway to it, or they could still shock it. So it was a very, very simplistic mannequin, probably around the, if you were to buy these particularly from Laerdal, because we've got one that basically we can ventilate, and that's all we do with it. They're around the sort of $5,000 mark new. But you could have an old ALS mannequin that no longer functions with defibrillation, but it still has the spring in it so that you can do compressions, and you can still purchase the $20 lungs that you can stick in so that you can ventilate. So what if you don't need to electrocute it or anything anymore, but you can still make it function as a basic mannequin that you pick up and move around? And that's what they actually did. They got basic mannequins, they put them in the various type of scenarios, and be it motor vehicle accidents, be it cliff rescues, the type of things that they really need to work quite well with, that didn't really require too much coordination with the actual helicopter itself, and focused more so on the clinical based environment that they were preparing for. And they took these very simplistic mannequins, and over that 24-month period produced some extremely positive responses in how simplistic training cut back to the bare bones, focusing on patient care and patient treatment, really improved not only their team interactions and their fine motor skills, but just the clinical and critical decision-making techniques that they could actually do. And yes, they did involve helicopter retrieval in some aspects, so they could practice their winching and things like that. But what they were able to actually achieve in a cost-effective direction was that the winch training could operate as normal and then add one of these scenarios to it, whereas previously they were trying to incorporate the running of the helicopter, the operation of their scene management all in one, and it wasn't really a cost-effective measure. And by doing what they've actually done here, taking that more simplistic approach, it actually achieves some very good outcomes. So one thing in particular, for those of you who have got some operations out there, that you've got some older mannequins that are sort of lying around, and you're sort of deciding whether or not you throw them away or you upgrade them to something else, I challenge you to actually have a look at them to see if you could probably use them in a very simplistic method. For example, down here we've got a couple of old ones which we plan to use for some of the bush evacuation, extrication, techniques that we plan to do in some of our higher end scenarios, because quite frankly I don't want to drag a $60,000 ALS mannequin or a $100,000 SimMan 3G out through the bush just to have some teenage student or young 20-year-old paramedic undergraduate student drop it and break him. Thankfully, also if we go down to the beach, if we've got a mannequin that we can basically throw around and not worry what happens to it, then we can do some more realistic beach-related scenario work and things like that. So don't think that just because the mannequins are old and dead that they're no longer useful. They can provide some pretty valuable immersive simulation opportunities to you at a very cost-effective way. The other thing that I've found is very useful in relation to the type of simulation direction that I'll be touching on a little bit later is something I like to refer to, and all the rural and remote people will completely understand this, is the curse of distance. Now, for me, the closest hospital in one of the areas I worked at that was of suitable benefit for a seriously ill patient was a good hour to an hour and a half away. Now, I still remember quite vividly a very simplistic patient that I went to. They had a fairly complex fracture of the arm, and they were approximately 1 hour drive from that particular hospital, but unable to drive themselves or on the farm on their own. So they needed assistance. Now, I was working on my own on that particular day, and because of the nature of the break, I was able to splint it and provide pain relief as required. However, because I was on my own, every time that I needed to administer some more pain relief to maintain the comfort and patient satisfaction of that particular patient, we had to pull over. So every 10 minutes or so, we'd put over to the side of the road. I'd check patient's vital signs, have a bit of a chat, and administer more pain relief. So that 1 hour drive back to the hospital ended up taking close to about 2.5 hours. Now, the patient was comfortable the entire trip, and his injuries didn't really require any kind of aeromedical evacuation. However, what I'm getting at is that the cursor distance can really hamper not only your treatment and management of patients, but also how we train our staff, be it paid or volunteers, and how we continue to go on with ongoing education and skill and procedural development and the costs associated with that. Now, some of the virtual reality and augmented reality simulation that's coming out on the market today, and I've got a little scenario a little bit later on that I'll share with you, is things such as Microsoft's releasing a product which will start to appear towards the end of this year and potentially on the market in 2017, and that's their HoloLens technology, which is effectively a holographic set of glasses that you put on, which is a complete unit on its own. And for example, this particular presentation that we're giving today, or the scenario that I show you a little bit later that relates to this, is I could be running this here in Australia, and if everyone else that's part of this particular webinar that we're on today all had these HoloLenses, we could be going through the same thing, and you'd be able to have the same immersive imagery in your eyes that I'm having here, and we could visualize the body, and we could tear it apart into different systems, and really show how these systems actually are affected by the type of treatment we're doing, and what could happen to these body systems if we don't particularly react in the right manner. And I'll give you a very good example about that a little bit later on. But the beauty of the connectivity that we have today that 20 years ago or even 30 years ago that we didn't have really provides us with some opportunities to train and develop our staff in a way that we never thought was possible all those years ago. I mean, even this particular technique that we're doing today via webinar, if we thought this was possible 20 years, 30 years ago, people would look at us and laugh. But this is the type of thing that we can take advantage of now. And with the improvement of technology, with things getting smaller and things getting more cost-effective and affordable, we can actually produce a more engaging and more event-driven training for our staff, regardless of whether they're paid or volunteers, in a way that we couldn't possibly have done before. And it really starts to break down that curse of distance in a way that previously it wasn't achievable. Now, over in the UK, they've already started with a patient assessment system, and this was put together by 3 universities and a 3D immersion specialist called Duncan. And what they've actually done is they've taken paper-based, problem-based learning and moved it into a virtual reality platform. Now, I'm not sure how many organisations here have approached problem-based learning with your education, but here with the particular degree that we're going through, as we're with a medical school, our medical school really has embraced the problem-based learning technique. Granted, it's still in paper-based form, and what my particular course will be doing is we will be exploring the possibilities of how we can implement paper-based PBL across into the virtual reality sense. And that's where equipment such as like Microsoft's HoloLens, Oculus Rift technology, or virtual rooms enables us to actually try and achieve this. So yes, if you're interested in seeing how the UK has achieved this, have a bit of a Google search on Duncan Limited, or search Paramedic Assessment System, and you'll come up with a bit of a description on how they've actually achieved this. And it's quite a very interesting way of achieving that, and it really does engage the learner in a way that previously you couldn't actually achieve. Back over here in Australia, we've got a Victorian ambulance, and CAA professional services have entered in on a multi-casualty management training scenario. So taken away a little bit from patient assessment or type scenario that they were doing over in the UK, this is more about developing your multi-casualty incident management skills. So what do you do when you turn up to, and the example you can see here is a bus crash. So what do you do as an on-scene controller when you've got multiple patients? How do you triage them, and what happens if you triage the wrong people? So CAE and AV work together, and they've come up with this virtual world as a virtual triage officer, and you have to go around within a certain time and triage the various patients to see if you can actually adjust the scene and set it up as you would if it was a real environment. Now, the way Ambulance Victoria was running this in the past was that they'd run these quarterly, and it was quite expensive because they'd bring line managers and sort of middle managers in and bring them up to speed on how they'd do multi-casualty management training, and it was quite an expensive process to do it, and there was no chance that anyone could actually ever do it twice. So they came up with the same concept, which was their major scenario that they ran through, and turned it into this virtual space. And after a month from its initial rollout, the uptake of officers completing the training was equivalent to the numbers trained during 2 normal years of scheduled face-to-face training. And the beauty of this was that people could go back and review it, and it sort of became a challenge to see if they could try and do it quicker than before. Now, it's not trying to take away from actually handling a multi-casualty incident firsthand, and quite frankly, really big incidences don't occur very often, and thankfully, because we wouldn't want to be managing these constantly, because they're not exactly the nicest environment to walk into. But this gives people the opportunity to actually approach this. And since developing this particular one, they're looking at doing one that's related to an aircraft incident with a basic commuter aircraft that comes down short of a non-commercial airstrip. So how do we respond to that, and what services do we need to call? So it's not only are we looking at virtual reality, augmented reality for training our paramedics in relation to maintaining skills, trying new skills, preloading them in a blended learning environment prior to doing some face-to-face training. We've also now stepped, with this work from CAE and Ambulance Victoria, we've also now stepped into how can we take some of the management expectations that we have on our frontline ambulance managers, how can we take some of those scenarios that previously we've done as roundtables and make them more immersive as well. Now, I must admit, I've participated both with this and with some of the big scenario-based days, and look, I really enjoy doing those big scenario days where you work with all the services. So you work with the fire service, you work with the police, you all have your allocated roles and you all come together. Again, nothing beats actually practicing in a semi-real type environment. However, the ability to actually preload yourself with some preloading information and get a bit of a holistic or helicopter view of how this potentially could occur really does provide you with a greater understanding, and ultimately I feel you get more out of the actual real scenario that you actually apply. And if you can combine those two things with an actual real event, I think the management of it you feel more organised, less stressed, and the management of it actually does run a lot more fluid than it would if you had no experience in that before. So, like I said, we're not just focusing here on dealing with patient care. There are other aspects that we can incorporate in the management or health science management direction as well. Now, another area that we've sort of moved into with our university is the gentleman on the left there with the tie. That is Dr. Gary Grant, or Professor Gary Grant at the School of Pharmacy. And what he has actually done is he has implemented a virtual pharmacy within the Griffith University pharmacy degree. Now, you can sort of see his virtual pharmacy wall there on the wall behind you. And basically what they've done is they've completely immersed an entire pharmacy into this particular room. And that's a completely interactive wall. So the students can go up, they can tap on and physically pull out the particular drugs that you see behind you there. It also has metadata built in behind it that actually provides patient information. And then they can use, like you can see with the student there holding the iPad, they can then pretend to type up the various scripts for the patients, and they've actually then got virtual dispensing operations and things like that. And the quote that you can see up there on the screen has come directly from students in feedback. And that's one thing that's really important when it comes to any form of simulation, is your debriefing and your feedback. Without having proper debriefing and proper feedback, there's no way you can improve in what you're trying to deliver, and there's no way students can learn from mistakes if we're not sitting down there and properly reviewing what we've done and looking at ways that we can improve, both from a facilitator point of view and from a learner point of view. Good debriefing is key with any simulation that we actually do. And away from the virtual pharmacy room, they've also got an immersive kind of computer-driven technology that they've got as well, where it's sort of like based on gaming technology, where you sort of move around a hospital ward and you go and see patients and you talk with them and you talk to nurses and you talk to doctors. And there's various gates involved that are linked to learning outcomes to ensure that the student actually is gaining particularly knowledge, and for the accreditation requirements over here in Australia, they're gaining the learning objectives of those accreditation requirements before they're moving on to the next gate or the next area within that program. So these are areas that you can add into this kind of technology to ensure that it's not just a particular game, it's actually something that is part of the learning process that students can actually be immersed inside of, and not only gain a more immersive understanding and feel like they're involved, but they're also gaining the various learning objectives that we're trying to achieve with what we're trying to teach them in the application of this knowledge as well. And one thing that is related to the particular research that I'm doing at the moment is that we're trying to develop a specific pedagogy that will actually identify how these virtual reality and augmented reality units such as Oculus Rift and HoloLens can actually be applied not only within basic paramedic education, but in other aspects that I've touched on before. The research is trying to clearly identify that instead of this becoming a gimmick that sits on a shelf in 2 to 3 years gathering dust, but it actually has a strong education pedagogy behind it that actually shows us how we can take it from this particular environment and move it somewhere else. And I think that's key with any new technology, is that yes, it can look very cool and it can provide some very, very interesting techniques, but unless we actually try and really underpin how it is going to drive where we want to go, we're not really giving the best we can to our students. So that's where my primary research is sort of sitting on at the moment. So moving towards more into medicine where we are now, this is an immersive screenshot taken from one of the HoloLens examples, and it shows you some surgery, two surgeons looking at the heart. Now, the way this actually is working is that although they're not wearing the HoloLens glasses, the way it was explained is that holographic image you can actually see is how it would be portrayed through the glasses, and the instruments you can actually see them holding would be connected to force feedback devices, which would actually mimic what they're actually meant to be doing whilst in surgery. And this is the kind of technology that is currently being pioneered over in the US, and there's particularly in laparoscopic surgery, there's plenty of examples around that have been that have been utilised at the moment, and just reading up on some of that, it's actually quite interesting. So if you have some time, and I'll get back with Gary too. There's some articles that explain how this has been put together, so I can get them through to Gary, so those that are interested can follow that up. But where I really wanted to take this was trying to show you sort of where we're going with our holographic direction with one of the projects we're working on right now. And I'm just going to try something a little bit new. So I'm going to share the screen because the particular animation that we need to show won't show up on here. So bear with me for a second as I just switch across to the screen, and we will see if we can get this through. So here's our immersive, here's my immersive classroom, and here's my particular patient. So what you can see up there in the top right-hand corner is a Microsoft HoloLens prototype. Now, in the middle of the screen, we can see our SimMan 3G. Now, where I find this really fascinating and really, I think, groundbreaking for where we can potentially go, in particular rural and remote locations, is that let's take probably one of the most common things we come across within paramedicine, and that is acute coronary syndrome, or ACS. Now, we can take a simple chest pain-based scenario, and we can set up, using this particular technology, we can set it up so that we can train novice practitioners right through to your advanced intensive care level practitioners learning new skills based on this technology. So I'm going to take my 50 to 6-year-old patient here who's got a borderline blood pressure. It's sitting around about 100 systolic. Their rest rate's around 40 breaths per minute. Their oxygen saturations on room air is around the 97%, and they're complaining of about 8 out of 10 chest pain. Their pulse rate's 55 and it's weak. And the way that they're positioned when you see them is that they're alert and distressed, sitting and complaining of severe chest pain. Now, what we're trying to achieve here with our sort of novice students is trying to express to them how we approach our particular chest pain patient with vital signs around that. Now, for our more medium to experienced practitioners, what we're trying to achieve there is it's particularly those that are looking towards, that are now using the 12-lead ECG direction. What we're trying to look towards for those is we're trying to get them to move towards doing a 12-lead ECG with holding GTN, and we're trying to get them to do a VR right so that they can actually see where this particular issue is actually lying. So moving back to our patient, the patient has no allergies, no medical history, and they're on no medications. Now, for a basic treatment, now I know everyone's going to have their own various policies and procedures for treating patients like this. So if this is slightly different to your area, I do apologise, but this is just focusing on sort of how we're treating it here. So for our basic for you, some of them would be the EMTB direction. So for our basic volunteers over here, they're sort of trained up to, they carry aspirin, they carry GTN, they carry a methoxyfluorine pain relief, some salbutamol, and oxygen, and an AED. So this is the sort of the basic level that I'm looking at. So for them, what we're trying to get them to recognise is someone sitting with really borderline patient profile that we've put forward. We're trying to get them to identify that this patient is potentially suffering from this particular STEMI. And we're trying to get them to identify that because they've got that borderline heart rate and that borderline blood pressure, we're trying to get them to hold off on administering GTN, and that they now need to communicate to the comm centre and see if there's any assistance for higher level care to come along that could then provide that various 12-lead ECG that we were just speaking about before. You could identify that they are having ST elevation in V4 right, so they are having that inferior STEMI. Because if they were to give GTN to someone suffering with these particular borderline patient's vital signs, then potentially they could tip that patient over the edge, and worst case scenario, could kill them. So that's what we're sort of looking at with the basic level. But then if you take that to the next level when you're trying to train someone into that sort of more advanced, intermediate to advanced level, well, you want them to be able to put on that 12-lead ECG. You want them to be able to evaluate that they need to do a V4 right chest lead to identify that they've. So we've got our ECG there. So you can see our various elevations here, but we want the more advanced person to then put the V4 lead across onto the right side of the chest and identify that we've got that particular elevation there. And then from the next level, if we're looking at reperfusion, hopefully this slide will actually work for you. And I apologise if it doesn't. It's a quick little video file, and what we're trying to do in relation to that is it didn't work. Sorry. Play. There we go. So what we're trying to do now with our more advanced intensive care or critical care levels is we're talking about using reperfusion drugs to try and break this particular clot if the patient is deemed suitable. And what we can actually do is we can actually zoom into the heart, as you can see there, and we can zoom into where the actual blockage actually is, and we can show the cause and effect of the drugs. And not only could we do this, but and this video shot was actually taken from a HoloLens demonstration. So what we could actually do in relation to this was not only could we look at how the reperfusion drugs could affect the body, and this is just an example of a heart done in holographic definition, we could also show the cause and effect of the GTN. So withholding the GTN, the heart's going to sort of maintain itself as it is at the moment. But let's show what would happen if we gave the GTN to a patient suffering like that. And this is where this immersive holographic kind of technology really comes in its own. So you're almost like you're immersing the student inside the textbook. And as I mentioned before, because these particular units are all in one, it enables you to actually, as long as everyone's wearing that particular unit, it enables us to be able to do this anywhere in the world effectively. So for those of you who have got people that they need to educate at distance, I mean, how great would it be to actually be able to immerse them in such a way to really show what it is that you're trying to do. I mean, we've all spent years looking through textbooks and having that sort of two-dimensional kind of approach, but having that three-dimensional approach in front of you really enhances the learner's experience. Now, where I'm excited is sort of, and this is sort of the main part now, is talking about our immersive classrooms. Now, the immersive classroom in particular, we've all seen this type of work where we have basic CPR or basic patient care where we're using a simulation, be it low fidelity or high fidelity mannequin. Now, this all works very well, but how do we try and engage the situation to try and prepare learners for what it's like to actually do that in the field for the first time? Because I do remember the first time I did CPR, I was in a room full of relatives, all screaming because their loved one was unconscious on the ground, and we're doing all these, we got people sticking needles into them, got people coming in with funny machines, and they had no idea what's going on. So how do you prepare people for that particular area? Well, I'll touch more on my immersive room a little bit later, but the goal of what we're actually doing is we try to immerse them, be it still image or actual video, where we can completely change the whole perspective of the room. Now, this is just an example of a swimming pool that we can project up on the wall, and it's one of the examples that we've actually done. But what if we actually had that filmed and we just had it continuously running on a loop, and you then had someone come through actually screaming at you while you're doing the CPR? So that could be, instead of being a child, an adult, that could be a child. So you could have an actor actually coming in and screaming what's going on, and really trying to set the scene for the people that are actually trying to learn this technique. So once you get the actual basic technique in place, you could then slowly make the same scenario more complex to sort of engage them, prepare them for various aspects. So that's sort of where we're going with our virtual room. Before I touch on that, I'll just jump back into conference controls. Here we go. Hopefully I haven't broken anything. There we go. And I'll just skip through. So that's another example of us sort of doing it again, but using a more complex scene. And again, the virtual room that I'll show you in a minute enables that to actually occur. But where we've taken it one step further again is that we have created virtual canvases for ambulances and actual houses. And this is where things like your Oculus Rift, which is your virtual reality glasses that come on, that you actually put on and completely block out all your surroundings. This is where they sort of come into your own. And some of the scenarios that we're actually going to build will be based inside this type of technology. Now, just like Gary Grant's virtual pharmacy that he built, we too will have certain gates and certain learning objectives that the students will have to complete before they can move on to the next part of the patient care process. So again, I'll send these links to Gary to share with you too if you'd like to have a look at inside some of these virtual spaces that we've got here. And I'll just bring up this virtual ambulance. So where are we? So this is inside our one of our virtual units, and basically what this does is it enables students to actually move around inside the unit and actually see various aspects of where they would sit when they treat patients, the various equipment that's inside. And further to this, the next iteration of this virtual unit will actually encompass a patient who is sitting down on the stretcher here that you're actually treating. So the monitor will actually be interactive so that they can, and this will be computer-based. This will be the computer-based or the glasses, Oculus Rift type based immersion, where they'll actually be able to engage with various aspects of the scene to treat the patient. And they'll need to do basics. They'll need to do certain, as I mentioned before, learning objectives or steps before they can move on. So this is a way, if you've got a lot of students, this could be a way to actually prepare them in the use of, or an orientation of their monitor, and orientation on doing a basic patient assessment with the monitor. So if you've got a way that you want them to apply the lead, so they'll need learning objectives, for example, they need to apply the ECG leads because the patient's suffering from chest pain. You need them to apply the pulse oximeter. So little things like that you want them to do as part of their basic assessment before they can then move on to other aspects of it. Now, again, it's a virtual environment. It's not real. So, yes, you'll always get your critics saying, oh, well, I wouldn't do it that way if I was on the field, or we'd do it this way or that way. But it's the concept of the things that you want to actually apply to the patient when you're actually treating them in real life that you want to sort of prepare the students for. So, again, this is just... We're not about replacing real life. We're about trying to prepare them and engage them in an immersive way so they can understand it more than... I remember when some of this equipment was introduced to me with my training, it's sort of, oh, here's such and such a monitor, we do this, this, and this, and this, and then your lecture's over. So it actually gives them a chance, and if there's something that they might have missed, they can then go back to their computer in their own time and review and go from there. So the other one that we've got is our Paramedic house. So this would be an example of a paramedic student arriving to a particular scene, and they need to, they go to the house. And we could have various things set up. So do they check for danger, et cetera, before they can actually go into the house? So they can go inside, and as you can see, I mean, we've got our hallway, and then if we move to our left here, you can see that we move into a particular lounge room. Now, this is an operational training house that's based out at the Port of Brisbane in Queensland at White Island Training Facility. So as you can see, I mean, we could put the patient on the couch here. We could put them on the chair. We could have them lying on the floor, or ultimately, I'll just quickly jump upstairs, and we could have them in the bathroom. So, I mean, how many people have been to a scenario where you've got someone lying on the toilet, and it's got to be the smallest room of the house? So maybe the learning objectives of this particular case could be, okay, yes, the patient has got a particular condition, but the primary objective, the primary learning objective to start with, how do we get them out of the bathroom? Or how do we get them out of that confined space? So they could be the learning objectives that need to be achieved before they then go and continue on with treating the patient with more advanced cares. So yes, they complete their basic cares to identify what is wrong and what they need to do. And then the next thing could be the removal of the patient. And then from the removal of the patient, then we move into the various care techniques that we want them to practice. So that's the beauty of the virtual space, is we can set it up how we want our students to actually engage in the particular learning objectives that we're trying to achieve. And this is effectively a blank canvas that you're looking at right now, and we can have an unlimited amount of particular learning objectives or techniques or scenarios that we could actually apply to make this happen. So, okay, so yes, there's our toilet, and as you can see, it's quite small. Okay, so I'll unshare everything again, and we'll go back to the normal presentation. Okay, now that's just our house and our ambulance. Okay, so one of the things that's quite exciting for me at the moment is the development of our Immersive Ambulance project. Now, this sounds extremely complex, sounds extremely expensive. However, we've been very fortunate to get some support from our local ambulance service here in Queensland, and we've had also some support from Stryker Stretcher as well, and I'll go into that a little bit later on. But basically what we've done here is we're in the process of developing an immersive ambulance room within the university, and as those of you who work in university environments might know, space is a rare commodity that everyone seems to fight for. So when I put my hand up and said I need a 30 by 30 metre square room with nothing in it, and I'm going to ban everyone else from the university from using it, it was a very interesting muted sound of conversation that was had around that particular room. In the end, I showed them what we were going to do and how it was going to change what we're doing with this program, and I was able to secure the room. Now, I would like a bigger room, but beggars can't be choosers, so hopefully this initial prototype will lead to bigger immersive rooms in the future. So what we've got is we took a 30 by 30 square metre room, we blanked out all the walls. We then created a 3 metre by 2 metre ambulance module, and effectively what that module is the inside of an ambulance. So chop off the front, take away the wheels, and basically the box that we work in the back. We also added to the roof 7 high-definition wide-angle projector monitor for screens. We've got 3 white walls, we've got 1 main wall and 2 side walls, and we've got 2 PCs running the lot. Now, with that image I showed you before with the woman doing CPR on the resuscitation dummy and then bringing the swimming pool over the top, basically what those 3 white walls will actually do will work as our immersive environment. So we could be running videos, a video that stretches around the 3 walls, or we could run a series of imagery that could set the scene as well. We can adjust the lighting to suit the scene and other things like that. So the purpose of the 3 walls and the 7 HD wide-angle projectors is to actually set the scene that we're running. Now, the 2 PCs, one is to run the projector screens, and the other one is actually to run the module, which we'll touch on in a minute. And that's basically how we've done it. So far, the purchases there were the projectors, acquiring the room, and the PCs. So the next part was, how do we come up with our module? So within our 3 metre module, what we ended up actually doing was we then had to acquire a fairly large TV screen for the front. So we're looking at a 60 to 70 inch TV screen. And then we were looking at 2 side windows, which become the TV screens about 40 inches each, and then 2 rear 24-inch TV screens which simulate the back two barn doors looking out. Now, what we basically do then is that when the students move from treating the patient in the immersive room, load the patient to the stretcher, then load the powered stretcher into the back of the immersion module, once the doors are shut, it automatically triggers the second computer to then run that module as if the ambulance is actually driving around. Now, we haven't gone down to the path where we're actually doing hydraulics like you do in aviation simulators. We've actually got it set up so that we've got 3 videos set up. We've got the driving away from the scene, we've got the driving around the area, and then we've got the arrival at hospital. And the arrival at hospital video that loops through these particular internal screens, when they exit the ambulance module as if they've arrived at hospital, the 3 immersive walls in the room then become the ambulance entry area to the back of one of the hospitals we've got down here on the Gold Coast. So the interior, how did we make it look real? Well, we have to thank the Queensland Ambulance for that, because they're in the process of decommissioning 160 ambulance units, and we were able to acquire a complete ambulance interior to actually kit out the interior of this module. So as soon as you open the doors, it actually looks like the current Mercedes-Benz ambulances that we use over here in Australia, right down to the powered stretcher on the right, the patient care seat on the left, and all the interior modules that we've got in the screen a little bit later on. And that is how it enables people to actually have that more of a feel of an actual real ambulance. Now, the actual layout of the room itself is that, as you can see, we've got our module coming out on a bit of an angle in the corner, and that leaves us with a little void where, for workplace health and safety reasons, we can actually put all our cables for power, Ethernet, communication, recording, and all that type of stuff. We can actually put it all down there so that the students actually have access to that white space. So you can see just in the top right-hand corner where you can see computers and control area, there will be sort of a little bench that sort of comes out here that will sort of run the 2 computers that are running that room. And these 7 screens that you can see down here, you can see that our 3 main wall projectors that will maintain this particular wall, and these secondary wall projectors will go over to the left and to the right. And they'll be hanging off the roof, obviously, so it's sort of a top-down look. And basically, the projectors will sort of, about where the M, if we draw a line across from the M all the way across there, so that's basically the field of view that the students will actually have once this is actually operational. So I was hoping that we would have the ambulance in by the end of January, but at this stage we're looking more at the end of Feb, probably early March. And that's just basically down to trying to get everyone in the university to tie up together and make all the bits come together. The ambulance module itself now, we've finished building, and we're now in the process of getting all the electrics to work. Now, when I mentioned that the Queensland Ambulance Service donated the internal module, not only did they donate the internal module, but it also included all the electrics and all the oxygen connections. So just like the buttons that turn our lights on and off, the suction unit, oxygen running, the internal fans, air conditioning, everything that would function like you have in an actual ambulance unit actually functions in our particular module. So coming back to sort of that cost effectiveness option, this is where those of you that might be looking at decommissioning units, maybe this is a purpose you could do with the internals of yours as a way of creating a similar module. We managed to as this is part of research, we're working with Stryker, who provided the power lift stretcher and the power lift device that brings it into the ambulance as part of our research funding. And we're very thankful that they were able to actually assist us with that. So that's where we've cut our costs down. So looking at ways to cut costs down to actually produce this, when you look around the things that you may have available to you, you may be able to do a similar thing at a very cost-effective way. So going back to the projectors, basically what you can see that these 3 projectors will then be able to enable us to project like that, and then have the once we've loaded our patient onto the actual stretcher itself, they're then able to move inside the module, and they're able to then continue their treatment inside. Now, as you can see from this basic schematic, our forward front TV screen, that will emulate the vehicle moving forward. Side entry door is purely that. That's just a side entry door. There'll be no screen attached to that. Our 2 wide 40-inch screens will be on the left and right side, so they'll emulate the windows we have there. And then we've got 2 smaller sort of 24, 27-inch screens, which are going to be on the back of the barn doors, the 2 barn doors there, to emulate the back of the ambulance. So the way that we actually will achieve this is that we're going to borrow a local ambulance. We're going to set up 5 cameras. So we're going to have one looking out the left back door, one looking out the right rear, one looking out the right side, right, left, and the forward. And we're going to set them up to record all at once. And then we're going to, as I mentioned before, we're going to then cut that video up into 3 sections. We're going to have a part that simulates the driving, which then moves into the driving around. And basically, depending on the length of our scenario, we'll just continue to loop that driving around video. And then when it's time to actually rock up to our various hospital, we can then switch the video to arriving at the hospital. The other video that we'll record too is how do we get them to practice having backup. So we'll work in with setting up another one where the ambulance will pull up and backup will arrive, and we can then emulate someone coming in through the side door and actually get one of the university lecturers to then go inside and act as like an intensive care or critical care level paramedic if we wanted to enhance the level of that scenario. So because I haven't got this completely finished yet, this is just a quick snapshot of what the internals actually do look like inside at the moment. So yes, as you can see, these particular cabinets, right down to the yellow handles, the fan, the CPR clock, the suction units, all of that is the same. The patient care seat. As you can see, here's the window. So that's where the 40-inch TV screen will actually be inserted. These is where the other 2 sort of 27-inch, 24-inch screens will be emulated on the back 2 barn doors, and on the right, same as that window, the other 40-inch screen, and then we'll have the forward observing screen done as well. Now, none of this would have been possible without the assistance from Queensland Ambulance Service for providing the internal module. The actual cost of that to us was the price of going to the location that disassembled, decommissioned it. So we paid a decommissioning agent $700 to effectively pull out a $20,000 ambulance interior. So I thought that was $700 well spent. And then we also had the support from Stryker Australia, who's been able to assist us with the power lift device and the powered stretcher to really sort of, it's going to be a show type prototype. So we really wanted to have the latest stretcher used by the region to really show off this module once it's operational. So yes, without the help of those 2 people, I think our project would be a lot further behind than what it actually is right now, and where the university is very grateful for the support they have given. So where to from now? I mean, what are we doing? I mean, I've shown things such as our immersive classrooms, and that's something that can be very easily achieved by our particular organisations around the world. I mean, that's I think as more people sort of move in this space, I think it will be available. It'd be available to everyone, and I'd be very happy to assist anyone that was looking at going down that path themselves. The object of virtual reality or augmented reality glasses or virtual reality glasses. Go back to our, if I just flick back to our ECG, learning ECGs can be quite a challenging experience for any novice. But if we go back to the PowerPoint here, and bring up my ECG. Here we go. Now, the beauty of iPads and some of these other devices these days is we can pinch and we can zoom in. So we can show and physically count these little boxes. So when you're showing a novice person how to read ECGs, you could zoom in and then show them how to actually count this. You can show them where the isometric line is. You can have these borderline. You show them the difference between what is glaringly obvious, like what we've got in front of us right now, or what could be borderline. And that kind of technology certainly wasn't around when I first started learning how to read these. And I mean, now when we're teaching, I mean, the ability to do that is just absolutely amazing. So that's something that we've got the ability to actually take advantage of now with this technology. Look, I agree there is still a lot of work that needs doing, and as I mentioned previously, part of our research is really to nail down a pedagogy that actually identifies how we can approach this and how we can make it go forward into the future and how we can develop it as it evolves to ensure that we've always got something in place that takes hold of the learning objectives we need to achieve and enables us to actually apply it across the board. The degree that we've put forward in the program proposal is a living degree. So as techniques improve, we'll adapt and change the things that we want our graduates to actually have when they graduate. So in designing the work that's being done at the moment, the type of things that we're actually teaching our graduates, starting with our first intake, which begins at the end of February this year, what we're training our paramedics to be is not what paramedics are now. We're training our paramedics to what they're expecting in 2018, and that's how we're looking at ensuring that the degree stays tip of the spear and at the front with technology as it moves. And where are organisations in Australia and internationally going with the type of things that are available? I mean, the type of technology available appearing in the back of ambulance now, such as mobile ultrasound and connectivity with hospitals, so that you can send the ECG through so they can see what you're seeing at the other end, and they can see how the patient's vitals are either improving or deteriorating. I remember working out in remote Queensland, coming in with a very critically ill patient, and then in the emergency room, all of a sudden this screen, which I thought was a wall, came alive, and it was one of the trauma surgeons from down in Royal Brisbane Hospital here in Brisbane, the capital of Queensland, talking through some things that they wanted to know as they were in the process of sending out the Royal Flying Doctors to retrieve this patient. And they had some techniques that under their guidance we were actually able to do prior to that aircraft going. So, I mean, that was technology, that's going back about 8 years ago now, when you sort of limited to video conferencing between hospitals. But I mean, that's just another example of how technology has changed. So, I mean, that is where we can go with technology. Really, it's up to the imagination of the people that are driving this and where they want to go. But ultimately, without examining and refining the theory and practice to define the pedagogy on how we create this learning environment, I think that is key to ensure that we succeed with this in the future and it doesn't become just another sort of basic gimmick. Because there are plenty of things that we can see. I mean, if we take a little look out of the gaming world these days, and you look at the technology and the graphics and the way that these type of things have appeared, and there's a lot of very talented people out there producing some amazing gaming technology that we really could take advantage of, that could be put into the same complex that we're doing. I mean, ultimately, with technology such as this used in the right method, following the correct and refined pedagogy, we could ultimately create better patient care, better patient outcomes, and really improve patient safety across the board. So that is that's basically me for this morning. I'll hand it back to you, Gary, and open the floor for any questions and other things like that. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Duncan. That was very informative. Let me unmute the line. I'll be curious to hear, there was a person from Iowa, I think, that said they were at a simulation center. So be curious to hear how this contrasts with what you're doing. Here
The
we go.
conference has
Unmute the
been
line.
unmuted.
Anybody have questions or comments?
Everyone's very quiet. Maybe I put them.
Duncan, it's Peter O'Mara here from down in Victoria.
How you going?
I know they've been doing some research over in Western Australia about at what stage students should enter into high fidelity simulation. Have you got any views on that?
Yeah, I have a few views on that actually, and it's some of the when we were developing this the new course up here in Queensland, they were very keen to get some very high fidelity mannequins and things like that in here straight away, and I put the brakes on that quite early because look, for initial paramedics, I mean in the first year we sort of go down to, for us personally, we're looking at trying to ensure that they've got the basic life support system under wraps, so good CPR, good technique, and learning the key things that they need before they sort of step onto it. Because I mean, quite frankly, why do you need a $50,000 or $100,000 high fidelity mannequin to show someone how to do CPR? I mean, you can get away with a resuscitation, like a simple little head and torso. Really, sort of, if you don't have your basic assessments down pat, if you don't have the key component, the key learning objectives that you're trying to drive into them with foundational knowledge that they can apply, then yeah, the high fidelity mannequin looks fantastic. But I think you're probably going to get personally, I think you're going to get better learning outcomes by applying the basics first on a more simplistic approach as opposed to going down the path. I mean, even when we move to sort of our more advanced levels towards the end of our course, we're only really going towards an ALS level mannequin. We're not using a 3G or a normal sim man because we're quite happy that the learning objectives that we're trying to achieve, we can achieve with that basic ALS type mannequin. I mean, probably the only advanced thing that we're doing that's a little bit above that, and the only reason we have it is because we need it for the device, is we're looking at pre-hospital ultrasound. So we've got a specific fast mannequin that you can actually ultrasound like a human body. But the only reason we're using that is because you need it for the ultrasound machine. Outside of that, I go down the path of, yes, you would go down the BLS approach and so your simplistic approach for your initial foundational knowledge in relation to training graduates, because I don't see the point in using high fidelity mannequins from the start. And even teaching normal paramedics and reviewing skills, there's aspects where the use of a high fidelity mannequin is a waste of time. Does that sort of cover what you're looking at?
Yep.
Yep. But yeah, happy to be involved if they want some people involvement from up here in Queensland.
Okay.
Duncan, this is Keith Minoski at Central Washington University Paramedicine Program. I thought that your presentation was very interesting and quite germane for me because we're in the design stages of a new building, so simulation is a major part of our pre-planning, of course. But we've also been doing problem-based learning for over 8 years, and I was curious to know from your perspective how you would employ problem-based learning in the virtual environment. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. One of the aspects that we're toying with, and again, this will we've got about 2 or 3 ideas that we've got on paper at the moment. But one of the aspects that we're looking at relates to some of the holographic technology that's coming out, or some of the augmented reality glassware that we're looking at. So we could have virtual vaults that open up in relation to patient files or particular aspects there. So instead of just sort of talking through and whiteboarding it with the students actually wearing these particular devices, you would actually be immersed in the problem-based learning tasks that you're actually approaching. Other aspects that we're sort of approaching too is that we could put some of the problem-based learning in a virtual computer sense, which is the easiest option. So that's sort of that was our easiest option, and then the third option is sort of doing a more traditionalist kind of approach. But either way, we're sort of involving people to be able to be involved across in the group. Now, each of our PBL groups, we have 10 students in each group because we're a capped cohort, so we only have 50 students per year. By having our 10 students, that enables us to have a sort of more cohesive size to actually get the most out of our PBL. But yes, using the technology, that's sort of where we're looking at going with it at the moment.
Thank you.
Yep, cool.
Anyone else?
Duncan, can I ask you another question?
Sure.
To what degree do you think that simulation can substitute for clinical placements?
That's an interesting topic in Australia at the moment. It's you even mentioned the word clinical placements, and it's a bit scary. Look, ultimately, nothing really replaces the experience of hands-on work environments. As a substitute, I think some of the ambulance services would in Australia may even go, well, that'll save us having to place students. That sounds like a great idea. We're not babysitters, and that then puts the onus back on the universities. However, I don't think the quality. I don't think you get the quality out of the learner if all they did was play in simulation and didn't actually experience any of it firsthand. I think there's only so much you can gain in simulation because simulation is generally always controlled, even though you try to make it uncontrolled with some of the scenarios that you can develop. Ultimately, I don't think it could replace. I can understand why the concept has been put forward. I like the blended approach, and I feel that it provides them with a better understanding of what they may come across out on placement, and depending how the placement is set up versus how much involvement there is with the student on placement with the crews that are doing the placement, and again, that's service specific. Depends on how much the student gets out of it, because you then have the argument of a student that goes on placement, sits in a seat, and they don't do anything for a couple of weeks. Well, what did they get out of that? Virtually nothing. Or maybe they go on a placement and all they get is hospital transfers. They probably wouldn't get too much out of that either. Where if you did scenarios for those 2 weeks, focusing across a gamut of various illnesses or injuries that a patient could potentially get, then yes, you could expose them to things that they didn't get an example to see. So I guess you got the for and against argument really. I think it's valuable that students gain experience in the field prior to graduating. For us, we've got a little bit of a different approach. Yes, we are doing clinical placements with Queensland Ambulance based over 2 periods. However, because our university is attached to the Gold Coast University Hospital, we're also providing additional placements across in the hospital, because many of the medical faculty here are heads of departments over there. So we're going to put them in day surgery so they can practice cannulating patients. They can practice putting in advanced airways. We're going to put them in maternity so they can experience and potentially assist with natural births. We're going to have them in the emergency department following around, learning how to communicate, learning the type of things that the nurses want them to, the knowledge they want to bring in when they give handover, and other things like that. So, and going into some of the aged care facilities as well. So that's sort of where we're going. We're trying to broaden our placement approach so that they get sort of a whole of healthcare approach, not just a singular ambulance approach. But yes, I think there is two sides of the argument. It's a difficult thing to answer. Personally, I think placement experience is valuable. But then if you go on the path of, well, if we do nothing on our placement, what have we gained? So I don't know. I think that could potentially be a Napa conversation in relation to sort of coming up with maybe some national ideas of things that ambulance services could do while students are on placement. So yeah, that's a bigger question than just me, but that's sort of my personal view.
Thank you.
No worries.
Anyone else? All right, well, Duncan, I want to say thank you, and we're still looking for a speaker for next month's session, so if one of you that's with us is a candidate for that, or you know somebody that is, please contact me. I'd appreciate it. And Duncan, we want to say thanks for sharing again with us today, and hopefully we'll see you in Saskatoon again this year.
Yep, no worries.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. We'll get with you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See ya.